promoting. It is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. And if you're going to operate in 2025, you need to know this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, you ought to. I tell you sometime. Um, Talk to Brother Herbst, the new biblical studies dean over there. He and we've had really good conversations about the Isaiah thing that you brought up earlier,
Mm-hmm.
but also he is fascinated by all things apologetics, biblical archaeology, and the like. He actually just made a trip over to University of Chicago to their archaeology center there, which you can get in for, I think it's free. It's either free or very little cost, and see some of the most incredible artifacts from history that I would like to sit down with somebody like Bart Ehrman and ask him what exactly he does with the historicity of the Old Testament, because archaeology, you could, in the 30s and 40s, when a lot of biblical archaeology was really turning a corner toward a very severe, like, we are going to get down to the answers, and a lot of things were being discovered at that time. You could see how somebody who was not raised in church and did not have faith, how they were skeptical of the historicity of the Old Testament to a certain point, but we don't even have that excuse anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of evidence, not just through manuscript evidence and through, of course, just the testimony of our lives, the existence of the Jews, things of that nature, not just that kind of stuff, but the amount of um, archaeological evidence that's been dug up, has been discovered. I would question, like, I would love to sit down with those guys and say, what exactly do you make of the Tel Dan stele?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that this certainly mentions the Moabite stone. That, what do they do with it?
Mm-hmm.
I know my answer. My answer is, yeah, this testifies of all that is written in the law and the prophets. I get that. What do you do with it? What do they think about these things?
Yes.
And it's
So that's fascinating to me because I hope to get my doctorate in anthropology, linguistic, and with archaeology. It's been a passion of mine since I was little. Probably every kid somewhere wants to go into the desert and dig and find something. The famine stela, where it describes Imhotep coming to Pharaoh and telling him there's going to be 7 years of famine. And here is this Joseph motif with the name Imhotep on it. Which some call that a fringe theory. I believe that because there's a new Egyptian chronology. I was in Egypt. I went to the museum, and they deny Moses. They deny Joseph. Any Hebrew influence, they eliminate it totally because they don't want to believe that Jehovah destroyed their nation. And they had this chronology where the upper and the lower Egypts ran sequentially. They were chronological. There's a new perspective now that says they didn't run in a linear fashion. They were side by side. They overlapped. So while there were pharaohs here, there were pharaohs on the other side as well, upper and lower. And if you look at it that way, then Imhotep is Joseph. And that fascinates me. One thing that has really got my attention is the emergence of the Gobekli Tepe site in Turkey. So there's been, who was the guy that went and claimed to find the Ark? Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt went.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
claimed to find it, and he did this documentary, and he was kind of known for some sketchy stuff, and maybe
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't the most rigor.
Yeah, grain of salt.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Just gotta, yeah.
Well, but then I read that they verified what he found to a large degree. They've carbon dated it. They've taken core samples, and they're like, okay, we're pretty sure this is it. So if that is the Ark, just south of there is the Gobekli Tepe site, which is older than Stonehenge. It's 20 times bigger than Stonehenge. And there's all these bones, and the carved reliefs on the pillars that have been uncovered are animals, and some of them are 2x2.
Yeah.
And there's a working hypothesis that this would be where Noah came off of the ark and offered sacrifice, which then grew over time. It became like a holy place. It became a place, a pilgrimage, like a Mecca kind of a thing, an annual thing where civilizations and cultures made it almost divine based on that. But it's the original site is what they claim. Well, they don't have the money to excavate it. They're upset. It's kind of ground to a halt because the more you excavate, the more you expose to the elements. You don't have the money to do it right. So they want to leave it buried till they can get the money to do it right. But the fact that that's emerging, the fact that we have ground penetrating radar and they can see the size of those columns, they can see somewhat underground, and that it might be where Noah offered sacrifice, given the proximity to the claimed ark site. It is fascinating to me, and I'm wondering what's going to come to light in the next few years.
Yeah, I wonder about so what I find fascinating in all archaeology is that ultimately, even those that are the most skeptical, like they have they don't believe in creation, they don't believe in the biblical story. The ones that seem to approach archaeology with the most skepticism are the ones that rather than seeing at the end of their whatever their research might be, they're digging, whatever it is, when the biblical narrative is readily apparently the answer, that it is the piece that reconciles their confusion. They choose confusion over reconciliation to avoid coming to the conclusion that the Bible is true. The funny thing, you were talking about Gobeklet Tepe with the animals. I thought this was really fascinating. I can't remember who I was listening to was talking about this, that the images of like the man with the two felines, and then you were talking about the 2x2.
Mm-hmm.
He said what has been fascinating is to discover the congruity between these images carved and the ones that we have found in
every culture,
Egypt,
every culture, yes,
the Indus Valley. And the reason why that matters is because people will say, skeptics will say, well, the similarities between these don't point to a shared history. They just point to interaction between the civilizations. The problem is that there is no evidence that the Indus Valley had a direct relationship with something happening in Gobekli Tepe at any given. You know what you understand is that, so now you've actually created a new problem. It's okay, well now you've got to explain to me how they interacted with one another. The using Occam's razor, what
the simplest
we
solution
can conclude is that these civilizations did have some kind of shared memory or shared history about the foundations of the world. Now, I know, and this might be a podcast for another time. People that have talked about like the age of Göbekli Tepe, and they've talked about who lived there and what exactly it was. There's all kinds of there are all kinds of archaeological sites that get dated for, in my opinion, spurious reasons. They just very very specious arguments that are made about why this has to be this age and why this has to be. But the interesting thing about that site that I will say is, number one, I don't know too many historians or anthropologists or archaeologists that would they don't debate that civilization began in the Near East. Where precisely in the Near East is a matter of opinion for some people, but the frequency with which Turkey appears in the interest of archaeological record, it is fascinating. It's something that you've got to convince me of a lot of coincidences. If I did not believe in the truth of the Bible, you would have to convince me of an awful lot of coincidences about the importance of the region. And there's I remember going back to the critics that talk about these things. I read somewhere, I want to say it was last year, I was reading a book, and there was a gentleman who was making an argument about, he was basically making the claim that the Old Testament is a reimagination of Israel's history that has no bearing, no historical reality, no, not rooted in reality. And he flat out made the statement that there is no historical evidence for the Davidic kingdom.
Oh my.
And you've either got to be intentionally misleading, like intentionally malicious, or genuinely unfamiliar with the subject matter that you're talking about to make a claim that ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is that there is, and growing, by the way, archaeological evidence for not just that King David lived and existed in a particular time, and it just so happens that his name, wouldn't you know it, his name actually appears in the historical record about the time that the Bible says that he
Yeah.
became king. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
And the not to just go down a rabbit trail, I guess, but the other thing about Göbekli Tepe too is I would be curious to as they continue to dig at the site, what kind of cultures lived there after the foundations of it, because they found human skulls there,
Hmm.
and then they've also found statues with no heads.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, well, skulls plus statues with no heads makes me think that probably at one time the skull was on the statue. I mean, that's the way I think, is just I kind of put things together like,
Yeah.
but you are 100% correct about the unusually large number of animal images
Hmm.
that were carved in that area, and they are carved in twos, and that is interesting. It's a
It's a
fascinating
prominent theme.
piece of history.
I was in Istanbul just a couple months ago, in Izmir, and I asked our guide. I said, "How hard would it be for someone like me to go to Gobekli Tepe?" And he looked at me. He said, "An American right now, you don't want to go to Gobekli Tepe."
Yeah.
And it's over on the eastern side, middle and eastern side of Turkey, and we're over on the side where it's commercialized, it's modern, the military's got a strong presence there, but there's radical elements over on the east side, pockets of even ISIS. It's like,
What would be harder? What would be harder for you right now to get back to get into Turkey, or if you wanted to like do an ancestry thing and go do research of your ancestors? Is it Armenia? Is
it's
that where your
Assyria.
family was from? I know,
Assyria. Yeah.
yeah, Assyria. Yeah, I wondered about it because I remember we had talked about some of that in the past. Like
Okay.
you just
Let's go down a rabbit hole real quick. Okay. And for everybody that's listening to this, forgive me. This is just, I enjoy talking to Brother Gill. He's got great insight on things. And if you go to the Epic of Gilgamesh and you read it, there's a ferryman who carries Gilgamesh to the world of the dead. And his name is Urshan Abi. And you go to Wikipedia and read about Urshan Abi. Just type in Urshan Abi and he comes up. He's like a contemporary figure to the Greek figure that would ferry across to the river Styx to the land of the dead. I forget the names right now, but here's our name, the name Urshan in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And they believe that there are remnants, legend that and myth that gets passed down, goes more hazy over time, that the idea that he crossed the flood to the land between the living and the dead was that he was one who would have survived the flood. And so there's this idea of a person crossing water. It's weird. You got to read how they describe it in the Urshan article. But I'm looking at this like, what in the world am I looking at?
So all the people that are debating and arguing with each other over whose ancestors came over on the Mayflower, you're like, I've got you all beat.
We got
I've
you
got
beat, man. We were there, man.
That's funny. Yeah, I was going to ask you too what you think about when we talk about like ancient manuscripts, that, in my opinion, and there's many, not just Epic of Gilgamesh, the Babylonian Theodicy, Poem of the Righteous Sufferer, Testament of Job. There are these ancient manuscripts that are not biblical in nature, of course, and are usually written by pagan cultures that they're reimagining the stories of the beginning of all things, or whatever the subject matter might be. I was going to ask you what you think about, because see, here's the thing: historical critical scholars point to those manuscripts and say, "Look, see, the Bible isn't so special because all of these cultures had versions of the story." But and of course, the way that I teach it and the way that I look at it is quite the opposite. Is that it's not that look, the Bible isn't so special. It's the question I'm asking is, of all of the versions of these stories that have not stood the test of time,
Which one
why
has?
did the Bible, yeah, and why is it also that the Bible seems to present history in such a way as to maybe not explicitly explain, but certainly implicitly explain how exactly this happened? Is that humanity does have a shared memory about certain. Now, that doesn't mean that that shared memory can't be perverted. It certainly can,
Oh,
and it
absolutely.
is. It's you see that through pagan myth. You see that in all kinds of things. Is that there is this what people think of as a ring of truth. It's really it's a dilution of something that was supposed to be
Yeah.
ever present in their life, something that was
Yeah,
right,
it
something that
was
was
the
real, and it
germ, the
was
seed idea is if you trace it back far enough. Yeah.
yeah. And so my question to them is just Job is one that I do spend some time on because I've spent a lot of time in the background of Job, and I ask people, is it okay? I can show you the playwright Ezekiel that wrote Testament of Job. I can show you the Babylonian Theodicy, poem of the righteous sufferer from the Akkadian text. Why did none of these stood the test of time? None of these were found worthy. None of these were found inspirational. They weren't found valuable to. But Job stayed,
Mm.
and so if you have a historical critical attitude, now again, I have the benefit of I can tell you why it stayed. This is the word of God. I can tell
Hmm.
you how this survived. What I struggle with is their answer. Is it what is it just coincidence that all that there's not just harmony between these texts, but that the harmony between them was competing with other ancient texts, but somehow this one was just innately better. Why was it innately better? I'm
Why?
curious.
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously it's the word of God, but um,
Yeah.
there is a willful blindness.
Hmm.
When we come out of the 1800s into the 1900s, we had a kind of a bibliocentric worldview still. Evolution and humanism hadn't been accepted as wholesale as it has. Um, and people would hold to a biblical worldview of things, and a flood motif was a guiding principle. I mean, archaeology, they just took for granted there's a flood. Well, as humanism took root and people discarded the Bible, it became anathema. It was almost like a holy war against any biblical reference. If you say flood, it's like you're saying cult. And,
Yeah.
it's just a horrible word to be branded with. You don't want to be branded with this archaic worldview. Well, we got rid of that so long ago. There's no worldwide flood. Well, the evidence is mounting that there is obviously a flood. And
Yeah.
they're running from that. They're willfully blind to it. One example of
Yeah.
one of those seed germ ideas, Imhotep is credited with the idea of embalming. And they say he's one of the first ones. He was one of the inspirations of Galen and of Hippocrates from the Hippocratic Oath. Both of them drew inspiration from Imhotep and his advances in ancient medicine. And the embalming procedure, they credit Imhotep with that, to where he even becomes a god of healing later on in the pantheon of Egyptian
Hmm.
gods. But if Imhotep was Joseph, which both of them died at the same age, both of them came from nomadic tribes in the desert, both of them came to Pharaoh saying there were 7 years of famine. After a while, you're looking at it going, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, then it's a duck. Um, and there's fierce debate about that. There's people that discard that and
Sure.
people that are passionate about it. But the idea of embalming contains the seed concept that the dead shall live again. And when I read Joshua 24, Joseph says, "Do not leave my bones in Egypt." They took Joseph's bones out of Egypt and they buried them in Shechem. Why?
Hmm.
He believed something, and
And
that,
a resurrection. Yeah.
yeah. Well, then this is so crazy, but the idea of a mummy coming back from the dead would be the polluted,
Yeah,
legendary.
like a perversion of something that was once
That's
true
right.
in the culture that
That's
had
right.
been twisted. Yeah, I think that, and you see that even with syncretism within the ancient world between, I don't personally get into the every culture had a trinity and every culture had. I think what people who study that thing and they come to that conclusion, what they're seeing is syncretism, and then they are kind of superimposing a Christian idea. It's like, oh, syncretism. It's more than what they're all God, but they're not one, but they
Mm-hmm.
are one. I see. I understand what they're trying to do, what I find more fascinating, though, is that what the ancient world believed about the gods, when you get to the New Testament, in spite of syncretism and in spite of their attitude toward the pantheon, I found it really fascinating when I wrote the history and development of the doctrine of the Trinity that the not the Jewish opposition to Christianity, but the Gentile opposition to Christianity, which primarily came out of the cults of Apollo and Dionysus. And if you read the story of Dionysus and you read what the ancient Greeks believed about his entry into, he was the last of the gods to enter the pantheon. He was the only actual god to have one divine parent and one human, because Heracles was not a god. Um, he was the god of the vine, and that he taught agrarian parables. It's even said of him that he was, and I went through this with our hermeneutics class, the story of his arrest before Pentheus,
Oh, wow.
that he was accused and brought before this ruler. And the interesting thing, his teachings were accepted everywhere until he came to his own country. It's very weird. You're reading it and you're like, this is almost creepy.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that when you get to the end of Dionysus' story with Pentheus, the story goes that when he was brought before the king, they tried to bind him with fetters, and the fetters could not hold him. And that when the king spoke to him harshly. Dionysus said, "You're going to pay for the wrong that you've done against me." And at a moment later, it says that Dionysus made the women mad, and they start tearing people limb from limb. They're, I think, eating people. It destroys all of his enemies that have brought him before this king and falsely accused him. And so his victory over them is seen in a position of dominance and power. But in the story of Christ, we've all these people that try to draw these similarities, and I've heard this from people that say, well, look, see, the New Testament, it's all this Hellenism, it's all this Greek myth that's been reimagined from Jewish history. This is why, because look at the story of Jesus and blah, 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 blah. And they clearly aren't familiar with neither the myth or the history, because in the story of Jesus, this is I'm trying to think who the ancient writer, Lactantius, wrote about this. He wrote about this interaction between the Christians and the ancient Greeks, that when the story of Jesus is taught to Gentiles, and you tell this story now, is that, okay, so let's say they saw similarities. Let's say they saw, okay, this is, they're a teacher of agrarian parables. He's, not welcome in his own country. And then you get to the story of his arrest. And the story from the New Testament is that he was led like a sheep to the slaughter, yet he opened not his mouth. And that when he could have called down angels, he chose to stay on the cross instead, and that he allowed them to falsely accuse him and spit on him and put a crown of thorns on his head. And the Greeks found it. How did Paul say? He said to the Jews foolishness, but to the Greeks a stumbling block. Or it's vice versa. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. Yeah, perhaps. And that's interesting, right? Why would they find it foolish? Well, because in the Greek world, gods didn't die for men died for the gods. And then the story of Jesus comes, is that what sort of God is it that would lay down his life willingly and allow himself to be falsely accused? And this story turned the ancient world upside down. Is that the story of Jesus didn't just inspire or fascinate Jews who had read the Old Testament. There were Gentiles who heard this story and saw something. How did Paul said it? They who have not the law do by nature those things which are written in the law. What does he mean by that? Is it, well, there's something written on the conscience. There's something written on the heart that can witness truth, and it can hear it and understand that's true. I can feel that. I can see that. I can know that that's right. And it is very fascinating. And I've always looked at that. I love talking to people who are skeptical of the Bible, because you can use the exact same stories, the exact same books, and the exact same arguments and come to the exact opposite conclusion. That when I read these things, what I see is that the testimony of the Bible is true, and that it's stood the test of time for a reason.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. One last thing I was going to ask you. You're a study of the ancient world, a student of the ancient world, where you've looked at pagan origins of different philosophical constructs. Have you had a chance to read the book? It's by Cristiano Cristiano Wormio from the 1600s, where he runs down the proponents of Sibelius. Have you read that?
I haven't. I haven't.
It's just come out.
Okay.
It's we have no Sibelian works that have survived, but there were some that Wormio had, and you can get it off of Amazon.
Send me that link.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. And for those of you that are listening, I guess this is something you guys can look up too. This is a skeptic. He's not a oneness advocate, and he's not a Unitarian advocate. He is definitely a Trinitarian advocate. And he goes to disprove Sibelius by digging up the original sources. And as he's digging it up, he's talking about Jesus' name baptism, and he's talking about how that Sibelius's ideas were misappropriated by his opponents, that he was not a sequential modalist. And it's a striking oneness point of view from a 15th, 16th century scholar. It's striking.
Do you think he knew or was acquainted with Michael Cervitus? Do you think that they I mean, because the time period, is very,
it's tempting.
He's close there.
It's tempting.
I think I sent you the link to that new translation of Restitutio that just came out.
Yes,
Cervitus.
I got him. I got the books.
Yeah. So I emailed, I got super interested in that whole, I just went down that rabbit trail. One of my students had sort of oriented me toward this new translation. I emailed the publisher, got in contact with the wife of one of the translators, and sadly, both translators passed away just in the last couple of years. And they were unable to finish the very last volume or last two volumes were Servetus's work on the resurrection and the coming of the Lord, the eschaton.
Wow.
And they were unable to finish. There is one completed translation of Restitutio that was done like 30 years ago, I think 20 years ago, but it's like $400 on Amazon. So I haven't got a hold of that one yet. So I'm gonna have to start selling some coffee mugs.
That's right. We got to sell a lot of coffee mugs to get that one.
Absolutely. I'm hoping this. So here in this summer, we're launching something called the Apostolic Classroom. And it's going to be a semester-based long-form discussion with myself, Brother Herbst from Indiana Bible College, and Brother Zuniga. We are launching a Truth Book Co. I think they might have done some promotion stuff with you. I'm not sure. The Truth Book Co. is producing the show, and we're doing a 16-week semester-based.
Nice.
And we're going to long-form discussions where we do one topic for all 16 weeks. That's all we do. Okay. And it's going to be awesome. And I'm hoping some of that stuff from Restitutio, the new translation of Restitutio, I'm hoping to include some of that in some of our discussions. It's been fascinating reading. My favorite part was that this is the only translation that includes the Edinburgh manuscript, an English translation of the Edinburgh manuscript, which heretofore had not been used, had not been translated. And what you find, I remember from the last conversation you and I had that I had mentioned that the longing for the new world was not just rooted in a generic dislike of England, but specifically the ideas of Servetus were being not just attacked, but his death and the consequences that followed motivated a lot of that move. Okay. In his opening remarks in the Edinburgh manuscript, if you read that translation, he mentions, and the translator mentions, some of Servetus's remarks about the same thing, of his desire to take his ideas to the new world where he could teach them and talk about them in peace.
Wow.
Well, of course he dies, and isn't it interesting how he dies? And it's William Penn who takes
Philadelphia.
Takes that, and takes that stuff to. It's just very fascinating. We gotta do another episode.
We gotta do another episode. That's right. For those of you that are watching this right now, William Penn had a desire to come to the New World. He viewed it as kind of the New Jerusalem, and it was going to be the city of brotherly love. Eventually it becomes Pennsylvania. Philadelphia was going to be the city from Revelation. The Church of Philadelphia. It was going to be this great opportunity. And he was a Unitarian. He was held as a prisoner in the Tower of London. I stood outside that tower.
Have you read Sandy Foundation Shaken?
I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's accused of being this like a spiritualist or like this non-religious I don't get that at all from Sandy Foundation
He seemed
statement.
very God-centered to me.
He was his attitude was one of reverence toward the New Testament and the
Yeah.
teaching of the Bible, and so, but that's, that's how people, when they find things like that through history, it's really easy to, to disparage it by
Oh,
saying, well, they were
yeah.
they were a non, they were a non,
Yeah.
like whatever that,
Yeah, and the smear campaigns and the victors writing the history books. But if a man is going to sit in the Tower of London for years because of his refusal to adopt Trinitarianism, he's got something.
Yeah. Oh, and Cervitus, I think I made the comment in our last conversation that we had no apodictical proof, or at least it had been claimed that we had no apodictical proof that Cervitus defended specifically Jesus' name baptism. They say, yeah, well, he defended oneness, but he didn't say anything about baptism. Not true. Reading through Restitutio, I'm going to paraphrase the remark, but he says, he mentions Matthew 28:19. He said, in light of all that has been said heretofore and what I've been writing, we can conclude that using Matthew 20:19, that the apostles' practice of water baptism in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ is the correct one.
Oh my!
So smoking gun. I figured it was in there.
Yes.
It seems silly. It seems silly that somebody that was an opposer of the Trinity so harshly, like to the intent that he would die, that he would endorse Trinitarian baptism, which he didn't.
So is it in the volume of 3 books that you turned me on to?
Yeah, it's in the first volume.
Okay, I've got him sitting right next to my lazy boy. Yeah, I've got him sitting right there. They're waiting on me.
I'll send you a picture of the page number. Yeah,
okay.
Really
well, Brother Gill, thank you for taking time today. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. It's edifying, and I know our audience is going to love this. And so I appreciate your time and your fervor for the things of God.
Anytime. Absolutely. I enjoyed the conversation, and I could talk to you about anything for hours. So.
Yep. We're going to have to do it again, brother. Okay. Well, we'll be praying for you. And for those of you that have tuned in, I'm excited that you could be with us on this journey here today. I hope you take this. I hope it becomes a blessing to you. Pursue the things of God. Fall more deeply in love with the principles found in the depths of God's wisdom. Until next time, God bless you, God keep you, and God cause his face to shine upon you.